Hey everyone, welcome to the Jungle Boy channel. This video is a prequel to another video I'll release later, which will be a review of all Jungle Book adaptations. In this video, I'll focus specifically on one version and go into a bit more detail. While there have been reviews of this version before, they've mostly been general overviews, but I plan to dive deeper. If you're tired of seeing reviews that always focus on the Disney version, the Soviet adaptation, or occasionally a film here and there, while ignoring others, then you've come to the right place. This anime was first aired on Japanese television in 1989 and later spread to other countries. When I, as an adult, decided to revisit this version, I struggled to find it. My last viewing was in my childhood, and I didn't remember the year it was released. In Ukraine and Russia, the title was shortened to just The Jungle Book, so I couldn't search for the full title, The Jungle Book Shōnen Mowgli. Yes, this anime is a shonen, and I only found it after describing it to GPT chat. That's the story. The anime was created by Nippon Animation, a studio I know well not only for The Jungle Book, but also for adaptations like Tom Cruise and Vicky the Viking. There's another one I can't quite remember the name of, but it was about a girl traveling on a ship with either a whale or a dolphin. I don't remember, but I believe that was also a Nippon production. This studio is quite well known and I believe still releases content to this day. I made a similar video in Ukrainian and Russian, where I compared this anime version to the Soviet adaptation. Originally, this video was supposed to be a dub of that comparison, but after some thought, I decided to focus solely on the anime and give it a detailed review. While I will occasionally compare it to other adaptations, this video will primarily focus on the anime itself, discussing both its strengths and weaknesses. And with that introduction out of the way, let's dive into the review. Tyranny graphics. All right, let's start with something that might make me a little biased, since this is my favorite adaptation, but I'll do my best to stay objective. When I couldn't find the title of this anime, I honestly thought it had been forgotten. However, in reality, it's relatively popular, especially as an adaptation of The Jungle Book. It just tends to remain in the shadow of the more well-known versions. Now on to the graphics. This is a rather ambiguous aspect of the anime. The art style here is typical of anime from that time. If you don't dig into the details, the graphics are good. The environment is very well done, and unlike the Soviet version, the wolf pack is far more varied in design. They didn't just draw and duplicate the same wolf over and over. Each wolf has distinct features. Yes, the wolves involved in the plot stand out the most. Each one has unique fur colors, body types, and so on. The female characters have particularly expressive eyebrows, which is a neat little detail. When certain characters have offspring, it's easy to spot the resemblance between parent and child, as it should be. On the other hand, there are some drawbacks. The anime has this particular feature. When an object is static on screen, it's drawn with great detail, but when there's movement, like when someone shakes a branch, the object becomes much more simplistic. For example, in the Soviet version, there aren't such mistakes. But in that version, there are no dynamic background objects at all. In some moments, characters jumping from branch to branch don't even make contact with them. They just push off the air. But let's get back to the anime. There are also moments like during the battle with the red dogs, where in the foreground, one character is fighting, while in the background, a wolf and a dog just stare at each other, opening their jaws repeatedly. Another thing is the lack of attention to lip syncing. The characters open their mouths and talk, but their mouths simply go up and down. This makes it easier for voice actors to dub, but even with that, there are some dubs where the lip syncing, let's just say it's less than ideal, and that's all I'll say about the graphics for now. Let's move on. Now we move on to something where the anime really shines. The main character here feels alive, ironically considering there's an episode in the series where Mowgli is buried, or rather, there's a mourning period for him, but I'll get to that later. But overall, by alive, I mean it in a slightly different sense. At the beginning of the series, Mowgli is 6 years old, and by the end, he's 10. Unlike the book, or even the Soviet adaptation, where he grows up to be around 17, here Mowgli is really just a little kid. In the opening episodes, it's clear that he is indeed a child. He's impulsive, whiny, trying to appear older but failing at times. The early episodes often revolve around Mowgli trying to prove his maturity. There's a video on English-speaking YouTube about the flaws of the Disney version, and one of the criticisms there was why Mowgli is always so liked, why no one sees him as a competitor or an outsider. In this anime, however, that's very much present. While earlier adaptations, particularly the Soviet one, emphasize Mowgli being a human as a strength, in this anime that fact becomes more complicated. He is weak compared to his wolf siblings, and the first episodes underline this. There's even a scene where his brothers are frustrated because their attempts to teach Mowgli how to run faster fail. Because of his humanity, Mowgli remains an outsider for much of the series. No one considers him a real competitor. He just isn't capable of competing at that point. Only later does Mowgli start to use his humanity to his advantage. He learns to swing on vines, he builds his own tools, and he even accidentally invents a boomerang, which becomes his main weapon for most of the series. But as always, the time comes when the rose-colored glasses come off, and it happens when the character is least prepared for it. Mowgli nearly dies in Cold Lair, and here for the first time, he directly faces the humans who almost caused his death. This is also when key wolves from the pack appear, one of whom despises humans, and many start agreeing with her. In the end, Mowgli is ostracized. He is blamed for the loss of their leader, not Akela, blamed for being human and for humans killing indiscriminately. As I mentioned, Mowgli wasn't ready to face reality, and he lashes out at his friends. He even beats up the monkeys. Eventually, he leaves the jungle, and it's only when he disappears that everything changes. This always happens. When things are easy, people will bully you. But once the responsibility for their actions falls on them, suddenly it's all, I'm not to blame. I was his best friend. I know this from personal experience. And here too, once they realize that Mowgli is gone because of their behavior, they start rethinking everything. There's even a meeting where everyone expresses their guilt when Mowgli's gone. Eventually, Mowgli is found, and they treat him differently. This is when he finally takes off those rose-colored glasses. He starts training, becoming more composed. He grows stronger physically and mentally. He is no longer the child he was. Now he's trusted with more difficult tasks and no longer seen as a burden. His development culminates in his victory over Shere Khan. The theme of being an outsider resurfaces when Mowgli reaches the village, where he's unfairly branded a werewolf. If you've read the original book, you're familiar with this part. For those who haven't, let me explain. A jerk, who is completely worthless himself, uses his influence to create problems for the main character. However, this jerk pushes Mowgli to kill Shere Khan, both in the book and the anime, with the aim of taking the tiger's skin and selling it. After Mowgli resists, this jerk causes more trouble, and Mowgli and his adoptive family are accused of witchcraft, tortured, and sentenced to be burned alive. I'll mention this jerk's name in the section about the characters, though if you've read the book or watched the anime, you likely know who I'm referring to. And I think that's enough about Mowgli for now. Let's move on. Secondary characters, and here's the part that I think makes this anime so beloved and popular, especially on platforms like DeviantArt. The secondary characters are probably the main strength of this version of the Jungle Book. In most adaptations, both before and after this one, the focus is almost entirely on Mowgli. But here, these secondary characters could easily be the subject of entire videos. For instance, Mowgli's brothers, who in the book, only one of them, Gray Brother, plays a role. But in this anime, there are two such Gray Brothers, and they are full-fledged characters, Sura and Akru. Interestingly, Akru is voiced as a female in the German version. Sura is more of the voice of reason, calm and composed. He doesn't often make rash decisions, whereas Akru is more hot-headed. If he or his loved ones are provoked, he's the first to react, which occasionally gets him into trouble. In the episode More Precious Than the Law, they argue because Akru becomes arrogant, but ultimately it's Sura who makes the rash decision. The community also knows Lala well. If you search for fan art of this anime, most of it will likely feature her. At the start of the series, she's a bully picking on Mowgli, Sura, and Akru. But it's not like in the Soviet version, where the world is simply divided into good and evil. Lala is Akela's granddaughter, and her father was Akela's rival for the position of the leader of the pack. After losing, he leaves the pack, abandoning his wife and daughter. Lala, who grew up without her father, and judging by the lack of mention of her mother, likely without her mother as well, finds Mowgli a convenient scapegoat. Alexander, her father, dies in episode 2, and all her anger shifts to his successors. This leads to a few more characters connected to Lala and Akela. Apart from Vermilion, there's Sanda, a female wolf from Vermilion's pack, who, when their pack fled into the jungle to escape humans, had her sister killed. Sanda is the one who stirs up hatred against Mowgli because of her own loathing for humans. Lala, after the events described in the section about Mowgli, changes her attitude toward him, but retains her original nature. Her character comes through when Sura confesses his feelings for her, and she mockingly rejects him. She gets even angrier when she finds out that Sura was trying to reach her through Akela. However, everything changes when Sura saves her life from crocodiles. Lala and Sura eventually become a couple. Lala starts to change, becoming a scout, a fighter, and an advisor. After episode 45, off-screen, Lala becomes pregnant, and by episode 46, she and Sura become parents. For nearly every character in this anime, you could write an analysis as long as the one I did for Mowgli, but this video isn't about that. However, I should mention a few more characters. Baldeo is the jerk from the village. He's not exclusive to the anime. He appears in the book as well and retains all the characteristics of his literary counterpart. Shere Khan is the main villain, and unlike in other versions, here he's genuinely dangerous. He killed Alexander. He attacks the pack and even cooperates with other villains. In this anime, Shere Khan brings the heroes more pain than any other adaptation. Moreover, he's intelligent. Almost every attack he makes is well thought out and planned. Tabaki is no longer just the clownish jackal from the Soviet version. Here he's a hyena, and even without Shere Khan, he instills fear. He's an active participant in the story, charismatic and sinister. In one episode, he almost kills Mowgli on his own. Bagheera and Baloo couldn't do without them. Here, Bagheera is male, and he has a strong personality. The local Bagheera is tough, smart, and has a sense of humor. Baloo, on the other hand, is calm and measured. But if provoked, he becomes fierce and merciless toward his enemies. Just remember how he snapped the crocodile's neck. Most importantly, their interactions with Mowgli feel real. There's a sense of family in their conversations, lots of heart-to-heart talks and gossip. Baloo and Bagheera often argue, which adds to their liveliness. I think I've covered enough about the secondary characters, so let's move on. A plot. This is the penultimate point in this review. In general, I've already touched on the plot in previous points, but here, the story differs quite a bit from the book, and in this case, it's actually a positive change. When I first watched the anime, there were many times when I thought I knew what was going to happen next, based on what I had seen in earlier versions. But then things would take a different turn, and I'd be like, wow. It kept surprising me, and that's part of why this version stands out. The anime has a lot more drama compared to other adaptations. At the same time, the episodes vary greatly in tone and themes. There's romance, detective elements, horror, and many other aspects. It's full of emotional moments that really hit deep, and there are plenty of plot twists. The series touches on feminism and racism twice, which I mentioned earlier. In terms of changes, the anime expands on many elements of the book, making some of the storylines more important and deeper. For instance, the previously mentioned cold layers are given much more significance here. It's in these episodes that we see the moment when Mowgli and Bagheera pretend to be dead, and their bodies are buried on the Council Rock, while they lie in the cold dens until Mowgli wakes up. The red dogs in this version serve as a constant looming threat. Everyone fears them, but no one knows when they'll strike. One time they kill Baloo's mother in a flashback. Another time, they come to the remote part of the jungle just to eat, while the pack is gathering intelligence, thinking the dogs want to attack. They later drink water at the watering hole during a drought, and then they attack Mowgli when he's taken in by a forest keeper. Despite all these changes, this anime is closer to the original book than even the Soviet version. The tone of the plot sometimes becomes darker than in the book, and there are many little details in the anime that were never present in the Soviet adaptation, and in fact, many of them don't appear in other adaptations either. For the first time in an adaptation, we get to see Bagheera's childhood. In the book, Bagheera grew up in a zoo at a princely palace. Here, Bagheera is captured, sold to wealthy people, trained, and beaten, until one girl opens his cage and sacrifices herself, covering for Bagheera during a gunshot. In the book, there was no girl. Bagheera simply broke out by himself. But in my opinion, the anime did the scene better, especially since it later plays a role in the finale. Warning, major spoilers ahead. Specifically, in the finale of the anime, Bagheera leaves the jungle with Mowgli, going to a rebuilt village, explaining that he feels attached to Mowgli and is familiar with humans, having lived with them before. By the way, those who've read the book might remember the mention of the city of Kanivarra, where Mowgli's adoptive family headed after the animals destroyed their village. In this anime, for the first and only time in all versions, we get a full look at Kanivarra. That's enough about the plot. Let's move on to the final point and wrap things up. Music. Well, I've already pointed out many aspects of this anime that I consider to be a big plus, and the music is no exception. The music in this anime is quite specific. There's one collection of tracks for all situations, and even though it's consistent, it's not lacking in quantity. The music from this anime is frequently used in videos about the Jungle Book, jungles, and so on. If you Google Shere Khan theme in English, you'll likely come across a version from this anime. There's no copyright issue with these tracks, so I can include them for you to listen to.
Двоє людей!
Insert Shere Khan theme. The music used in the series does have some variation, and all of them are quite good. Insert. And of course, it's worth mentioning the openings and endings. This anime has a unique feature. Different dubs have completely different openings and endings. My favorite versions are the Ukrainian and English ones. The Ukrainian opening introduces us to the lore and the rules by which the characters will live. And the ending, in the Ukrainian version, celebrates Mowgli's story as the boy who was adopted by wild animals.
Мисливця на ловах ти не почуєш, слідів не залишить ловець ніяк, неначе по небу юнак крокує, бо між звірами мир, кожен звір звіру брат. Але поволі, за згодою вовків, звір дикий хлопця зігрів, сім'ю нову малюк зустрів, і здобув він вірних друзів, своїх захисників, повір у свої сили йти, просто сміливо до мети, слабким завжди допомагав.
Overall, the music is really great here. This point ended up being brief, so let's move on to the conclusion of the review. Conclusion. In the title, there's a question, the best adaptation of Kipling? When reviewing this version, I tried to be objective, evaluating the anime without letting my personal bias, since this is my favorite version, affect my judgment. And yes, it's the best adaptation of Kipling's work. Despite the fact that the animation isn't the anime's strongest suit, the backgrounds and details are drawn well. Some aspects stand out to the eye. Overall, it's excellent. If you want to watch something based on the Jungle Book but haven't seen this anime, I highly recommend it. The anime may not be the best thing ever, and it's not my absolute favorite anime, but as an adaptation of the Jungle Book, it's an outstanding piece of work. And with that, I'll say goodbye. Take care, everyone.